Okay, so I before I go walk through the exercise, here is an example of float that I think explains it a little bit better. So here I have just a regular HTML document. It has a header, a div, and 3 paragraphs. Now each of those is a block level element. So you would imagine, as block level elements do, they stack on top of each other. So here's the H1, here is there's a div, right, that's floating, and then here's my 3 paragraphs. So they're stacked on top of each other. If we were to look at these in the inspector, see how each of them goes all the way across, okay? That's why it's pretty clear that they're stacked on top of each other like layers of a sandwich. Okay, so let's start playing around with this floaty business. If I've already got some styles already set up. Before I apply the float, before I apply a float, let's just make this div look like a box. So I'm going to say class, and I'm going to give it the box class. So let's take a look at the screen. So yeah, it's got a box here. I've got a margin going all the way around it. It's not floating yet. It's still a block level element, but it's sitting there up on it. Now it looks like a box, so you can determine what it is. So let's throw some float on it. Float left. Now that makes it float. As we can see, it's sitting over here on the left. All this other stuff is sitting, wrapping around it. So what's actually going on? So why are we doing this? Floats were originally created, part of the web spec, to have like images or figures or something that would have text wrap around them, very much like in a magazine. So if you're trying to put a magazine or a newspaper layout together, that's what the whole purpose was. Web developers got creative with it and decided, well, we can make whole page layouts, floating block level elements together, and got really creative and hacky about it. And that's why we're kind of teaching it to you, because, and this is more of a historic thing, that web pages used floats to actually lay things out to make them look like magazines and newspapers. Now, we have different ways of doing that, but that are probably a little more efficient, but we teach you this stuff because it is something that there is a lot of code out there, and this is how this is how code used to be written. Okay, so we've got a box. It's floating left. What I wanted to show you was what's actually happening to these things that are sitting over it. It looks like they're sitting over there to the side, right? I'm going to apply this test class to the first paragraph in our code. Oops, that's not going to help. Class gets test. So, and all this class is doing is giving it some padding, changing the text color, and changing the background, just so we can see what's going on with this element. So if we take a look, we can see, wow, so the element is actually behind the float, whereas its content has been pushed over by the float. It's as if the floating element is floating on top of the thing. So because of that, so this, I guess, explains where the word float comes from. It's the floating element is not really inside the document anymore. It's kind of sitting on top. All it's doing is affecting any inline content that's coming in contact with it. So the stuff that's inside the paragraph is affected by the float, but not the paragraph itself. The paragraph itself is still underneath. And so the question becomes, okay, what if I don't want this paragraph to be affected by this floaty thing? Or I don't want this paragraph to be affected by the floaty thing, because you can see, look, it kind of wraps weird, so we don't want that to happen. Well, this is where the clear property comes in the styles. So what I'm going to do is now I have a class down here called test2. Test2 will apply the clear property. So let's add that class to the third paragraph, class test2. Now you can see it's not affected by the float. It basically is ignoring the float and starting over right after the float. Its height is in padding or whatever else is applied to it. So that's what clear does. It's clear both. Why is it both? Because you can clear left or you can clear right. Right now our floating element is floating to the left. If I change this to float right, look at it, it's over here now. But this thing is still cleared because it's cleared both. If I set this to clear left, it won't clear this right element. It'll only clear the left element. Why would I want that? Maybe I have a floaty thing over here that I don't want it to clear. So you get it. It's like it's really quite configurable. So if I clear both, this thing is now clearing it. Okay. So hopefully that kind of gives you an image of what the float does. Now, we talked about clear fix. Sometimes it's useful to make sure all of our floaty stuff, since this kind of creates some unpredictable stuff that's going on, like what happens if our display is a different size. Sometimes it's not predictable. What we would like to do is maybe contain all that floating stuff within a container so that all the floating stuff is in one spot. So for example, let's put that's a div. Let's put the float and the first paragraph inside of a div. So this outside div is the container. To make that just clear, I'm actually going to give it a class called container. Save it. Let's see. So to show you where the container actually is, I'm going to give it a background color of red. So let's take a look. And as we look at it, the container is not visible. Even though we know it's there, we see that the container on the HTML is actually around the float box and around the first paragraph. We would imagine that, let's see, let me refresh this page. We would imagine that it would actually show up here somewhere, that we'd see some red. And all of that is that this thing's still sitting here. So why is this still sitting here? The reason for that is that the floating object is not affecting the container's height whatsoever. The only thing that's affecting the container's height is the thing that is a block level element that actually has some content in it. So if I was to take the background color off of this paragraph, we would be able to see, oh, not the padding. We want to take the background color off, that the container is really the same size as this paragraph. So we actually, in this case, what we would like to have is our container just be around this, and let's push this away. So it's only affecting the things that are in, the float is only affecting the container and the things inside the container, okay? So the way we can do that, there's a few ways we can clear this. One way to clear it is to put just like a place, just a div. Its entire job is just to clear. So it doesn't have any content in it, but it will clear. So I'm going to, as we remember, the test2 class is just a clear. So I'm going to put that there. And now there's an element, there's an empty element that's right under here that comes after this float that makes this thing give it its height. So that's one way to clear that container to make sure it behaves like we would hope it to. Another way is to do what we suggested in class, which is to apply a special kind of class that web developers created called the clear fix, which is saying, I want to fix any clears that are inside me. That's not a clear fox. We want to clear, oh boy, clear fix. So I don't have this class written yet. I'm going to write it. So dot clear fix. the way we create a clear fix is we're actually going to create a pseudo element called after. This is part of, you can't just create any pseudo element. For every element in the for every element in a web page, you can create an after or a before pseudo element. One that's just kind of copied in. It's being created by the CSS. So we're going to create an after pseudo element. We can actually put content in there. Just text content. You can't put HTML in here. I'm going to put an empty string. And all it does is it gives the after pseudo element presence. You know, it's like blessing it, making sure that it shows up in the document. But I'm going to give it a display context of block. And then from here, we can actually do the clear both. So that will clear whatever comes in. That will clear whatever is inside of an element that has the clear fix class. So I've applied the clear fix to this container. You'll notice I removed that little div down here. So it's because it's kind of messy, right? You're having this div that has nothing in it but a class. It's just kind of, it's messy code. This is a little bit cleaner. If I look over here, the clear fix has actually cleared. It has cleared the float that's inside there. I said there's 3 ways. So I'm going to take this clear fix off. And if we take a look without the clear, you can see it's almost as if this thing is overflowing its container. So if we look at inspect container computed, let's take a look. It doesn't have an overflow property. We can tell the container to overflow, to handle floats that are in it. Okay, handle the overflow of floats that are in it. So here's our container class. There is a property, CSS property called overflow. And we can set it to say auto. This will make the container actually behave as we'd expect it by handling the overflow of its floating container, of its floating objects. So this is just an overview of how floats work, and hopefully this explains some things that I did not explain very well in class.